Well, good afternoon and welcome to the homestead. My name is Jonathan. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day to join us for this sixth episode of Porch Talk for the 2023 season, which is already well underway. Lots of wild things happening in the world. We're going to take a bite out of the banking crisis question today. And I think the biggest question that I'd like to answer and maybe turn it around to ask another question is it a banking crisis or is it a stewardship crisis? Well, let's take some time to look at some history of a banking system in America, and we'll try to answer some questions. Probably over since COVID, this is probably the most asked question I've got for a while, so I hated to not address it. So I hope this broadcast is a blessing to you today. I know a lot of you really enjoyed having Pastor Scott, the man, the myth, the legend, with us on episode 5, and so I think we will do that again at least one more time. We'll have a special guest on Porch Talk, and I think that's a lot of fun and gives you an opportunity to get to know some really great people that you might not otherwise get to know in a more personal way. So I want to begin today by answering the question. I've kind of got a list of questions here to try to answer, and so I want to begin with the most basic question and answer what actually happened. Because, as of course is always the case, we have lots of different media coverage and saying all kinds of different things. What I've noticed particularly is that we take an honest question and we politicize it, and then depending on whether you are from the left or from the right, you give an answer to try to explain the situation that will mostly benefit your particular political party. So we're going to try to remove that aspect of the question today and take a look at it and really specifically ask ourselves, why does that matter to us? Why does that matter to the church, to the gospel ministry? What does the scriptures have to say about it? We've got some great scriptures to look at today, and so that's really our theme and our focus as we begin to dive into that. So what actually happened? Well, a very quick overcap. Most of you who are, even if you're in your 20s, you remember the great financial crisis of 2007 and 2008. And in that particular situation, which has similarities to what we're seeing this in 2023 and differences to what we're seeing in 2023, was kind of a tremor of a greater instability. We'll call it a financial instability in the system. And that instability really began when the U.S. silver dollar, that was backed by a tangible item, left that standard. Started a little bit during the Great Depression, a little bit more in 1964, and then finally in 1971, the end of that, where we began a new monetary system called, or often referred to as, a fiat monetary system, meaning that there's nothing backing it, that it's just whatever somebody thinks it's worth. So when we got into that situation, historically, it was just a matter of time until that financial monetary system began to collapse and ultimately fail. To this day, there has never been a civilization that has had a fiat monetary system that survived that situation. So what needs to happen ultimately is for us to transfer out of this situation and back to a more stable monetary system. Of course, that's out of most of our hands. There is something you can do about that. We'll talk about that later. But that's generally what has got us into the situation that we're in, because now the world is calling into question what the real value of the dollar is, especially after this large period of inflation where our buying power and our standard of living has become eroded, and people begin to be concerned. And then when banks fail and go bankrupt and tellers close the doors, people can't get their money out, that causes a lot of concern, just like it did in the 1930s. Now, one of the things that has kept your bank open today is that the government stepped in much more quickly this time and basically did, even though some media outlets are denying, and certainly the government, elements within the government are denying this is what they did, but they did a bailout. And so that's basically to come in and say, we're going to prop this bank up, we're going to keep the doors open to prevent the big C word. And no, it's not the cocoa from 2020, it's contagion, the new C word. Lots of C words to remember in the 21st century. So that was largely, at least to this point. I mean, who knows what will happen an hour from now? But to this point, that contagion has slowed down the collapses. We've seen 6 or 7, 8, 9, 10 collapses, but that's, I mean, really a small drop in the pond compared to what it could have happened, if something hadn't been done. Now, sometimes, unfortunately, the cure can be worse than the disease itself, and unfortunately, I'm afraid that the bailout cure probably is, in the long term, a worse will give us a worse outcome than just letting the system go ahead and collapse, and creating a new monetary system that's based on something tangible. The problem with that, obviously, is that would be a disaster for quite some time, and could be a similar situation to the Great Depression that we experienced almost a century ago. So the decision was made. Most of our hands outside of that was made to go ahead and do those bailouts, and so now the taxpayer, in fact, is obligated, contrary to certain statements made by certain people. The U.S. citizens are now obligated to fully pay, in its complete and entirety, the bailouts, which I believe when I kind of calculated all the bailouts and then what was going to be paid out from this week's bank failures, we were somewhere around $600,000 per family, per tax-paying family, which I don't know about you, but that is a huge burden for me to pay out $600,000 over time to pay back these bailouts. So, we start to get in the weeds when we debate those specific numbers. So let me back out of the weeds just a little bit to say, I would agree that's not going to come through taxes, because that would be political suicide. How will it come? The hidden tax, inflation. So more money will be printed to pay for these bailouts, because obviously the U.S. government, which is $30+ trillion in debt, can't pay it. So it will come from the taxpayers through inflation. Now, why is that so important for this conversation regarding our money that exists in banks? Well, the problem is that central banks, and I need to try to shore up my language and make sure I'm specific. There are decentralized banks that are springing up all throughout the world, that are outside of this system. So it would be unfair to throw all banks in that category. And I want to clarify, too, that by no means am I throwing banks or bankers or tellers or custodians who work at the bank under the bus. By no means, because in the United States, in order to get a license to become a bank, you have to participate in the system. So while just like in every industry, there are crooks and thieves, I really believe that by and large, bankers are good and decent people that are just trying to provide for their families like everybody else, and they have to exist under this debt-based fractional reserve fiat system, and until other options become legalized, and until other means of monetary exchange for digital assets like Bitcoin and Ethereum and other digital assets become legal tender, well, then there's no option really to opt out of the system for those institutions, like there is for individuals. Individuals can opt out. If you decide you do not want to participate, then you can buy Bitcoin, and you can use Bitcoin to purchase things and get a credit card or a debit card, and that card will convert your Bitcoin to dollars. So you can opt out of the system, but banks don't have that situation. So they have to play within the rules, and they have to loan out money that they don't have. So let's talk about that, because ultimately that is the problem. That is what caused the 07-08 crisis, although that was more of a real estate specific crisis. This is more of a liquidity crisis. But ultimately the problem is that a bank doesn't have to keep your deposit. So when you may not be aware of this truth, but when you give money to the bank, they quickly take that money out of your account and invest it in something, or give it to another bank, or buy an asset with it, with the goal of that asset appreciating. And then they take the profits. And then when you need your money, they sell those assets or move those assets around, and then they give you your money back. Well, that works great as long as there is more money coming into the system than money that's going out, which I believe, if we think back to a few episodes ago, that really is a Ponzi scheme. But right now, that's just the situation is what it is. So in this particular case, banks invested too much money. They lost it. They basically lost people's money. They placed bets with your money, lost it, and then they couldn't give you your money back. To which you are probably thinking that should be illegal, and it certainly is immoral and unethical. And I would agree with that. But again, we can't immediately change the system that we are in. That is just how things are done. So what we have to understand about the history in answering really our first question, what actually happened, is that once the liquidity was gone, those debts could not be repaid, and we were stuck in a situation where a larger entity had to step in and provide liquidity for those institutions because the money was not there. And then, of course, it would be unfair. Sorry, I'm getting my notes set up here to go on to the next point. It would be unfair for us to just say, oh, well, this is just an SVB problem or a First Republic Bank problem or an Ally Bank problem or whatever banks have had trouble. But really, it's just a problem in the system. Those were the ones that were the most leveraged, and they're the ones that collapsed first, kind of like Bear Stearns and Lehman Brothers back in 2007 and 8. So how does that affect us now? So the effect is, as we discussed, that now we're going to have to pay to fix that problem in the banks. And we have a choice. We can either stop doing that, stop loaning out money like that we don't have, or we're just going to have this problem in the future. Well, let's look at both options. Let's say that we stopped. Let's say that all of a sudden Congress grew a brain, and no, that's not very fair. I think there's a lot of good people in Congress. So let's go back and rephrase. Let's say that Congress allowed the sense of immorality of what's happening to grow on their conscience, and then they began to take a stand to do what's right and to say, if someone gives them your money, you can't just loan it out to some speculative investment and then not give it back, but just to say banks need to keep cash for the money that they loan. Well, the problem with that is, and this is why I was really careful to not throw bankers or banks under the bus in the beginning of this discussion, because it's easy to blame them. I think it's easy to say, oh, it's the greedy banks, it's all their fault. Well, the problem is what's written on a dollar bill. So if you look at a dollar bill, let me just pull one out here. Sorry to give you an earthquake on the camera. It says, this note, sorry, I'm not a professional camera guy. All right. This note is legal tender for all debts, public and private. So it's not money, it's a note. It's a piece of debt. And you can take this debt, allegedly, and exchange it for something tangible. The problem is that when the value of this declines, you cannot get a tangible item, and so that's why it's not technically considered money. So that's kind of the dilemma. So you can probably, if you're kind of thinking about the situation, you're realizing, well, wait a minute, if we stop creating debt, and if the government stops borrowing money, then all of a sudden the whole system will freeze up, because there won't be liquidity, people won't be able to pay their debts, they won't be able to make payroll, and so it's a domino of chain of catastrophe if we stop doing that. It's kind of like, and a lot of people over dramatize it and use this analogy, but it is, I believe, an accurate analogy. It's kind of like somebody who has a drug problem, they're addicted to heroin, and they've been addicted to heroin for quite some time, then they just stop cold turkey, and then they have other health problems with their organs, or their heart stops, or different things, and by stopping the heroin they actually kill themselves, kind of like the opposite of an overdose, just a shock to the system without getting that heroin. So oftentimes, and I'm not a doctor, but I've heard that they have to use other drugs or kind of slowly reduce that heroin in your system to where your body can tolerate that change and to where you can survive it. So it's a little bit like that. And so the other alternative would be, well, to just keep borrowing money and just keep spending more than we have. And then this problem's going to come up over and over again until a solution for the system is finally found. So that's generally, and that is short of a version. And I, of course, I spend a lot of time being in the business world and dealing in finance, particularly now in decentralized finance. I spend a lot of time thinking about this, reading about it, listening to experts about it. That doesn't necessarily make me an expert, but I think that if you'll fact check all of the facts to this point, you'll find that they are reasonably correct. So then we have an interesting question. I'm going to have to quit letting my device time out here on us. Sorry about that. So what is that? What are the effects of that? And I want to answer that kind of in two parts, on the world at large and on us, because there's really two very significant things happening here that we need to discuss. And once we answer those, then we're going to take a look at the solution, because I never ever want to present a problem without offering at least a possible solution. My solution always is going to come from one place, and that is from God, from the Lord, through the scriptures. And so we'll take a look at some of those solutions. But before we do that, I think it's important for us to answer these two questions. So let's answer the first part. What does that do to the rest of the world? Well, as we've discussed on Porch Talk before, really when you have one particular monetary system that can endlessly print money, but that the other nations and people can't, that is a type of slavery, because they don't have the ability to compensate for the inflation that's caused through unlawful and unethical and immoral money printing. And the reason why, let's pause for a moment, even before we get to the scriptures and look at why it's immoral and unethical. If you will just consider that problem. So let's say that I want to buy a bag of grain from you, and I'm going to say, hey, I have some dollars and I would like to give you these dollars for that bag of grain. Well, how many dollars I give them is based upon what kind of compensation that dollar will bring for that person that has a bag of grain. So if the dollar keeps its value constant, well then let's say it's $100 for a bag of grain. I know that it's probably not that bad yet, but that's probably coming. So we'll just say that for our math here. So let's say it's been that way for 6 months. It's $100 for a bag of grain, but then now I print some extra money in my basement, which I'm not, to be clear, because that's illegal. So I do not do that. But let's just say I did, and I said, okay, well here's the $100, but I'm going to give you 50 of the money I made and another 50, right? So then they kind of look at that and they're like, well, wait a minute. If everybody's doing that, then I'm not going to be able to buy as much because I have grain. It's an actual tangible thing, and you have toilet paper, and it's really can only do one thing with that once it loses its value. So then I don't want to sell you my grain. And that's really what's happened in the world. And that's why China and other countries have pushed back against the dollar, because once we left the gold standard to where the dollar had a tangible value and it was tied to a specific asset, it really was a way for us to steal from other countries, to benefit off of their cheap labor, to benefit off of this unfair trade practice. And so then we got into a lot of trade wars and trade problems over the last few decades because countries began to wake up to what we were doing. Now, we started slower with less debt, much slower deficits, and a lot less quantitative easing. But now we have accelerated it so much, especially since the cocoa. And yeah, I mean, it's all political parties. Well, I shouldn't say all, both of the major political parties. So that's not a political issue, because if you go back and look at the facts, as much as I don't want to admit it, both Republicans and Democrats have contributed to deficit spending. So I don't think it's really a political issue. It's just a systemic issue that is occurring. So as the world begins to realize that we are cheating them in this way, and I realize that's a hard language, but I mean, it would be unfair for me to say it's not. I mean, it's cheating. If you can create money out of thin air and try to give it to somebody when it has less value than when you first began doing it, that really is unfair. And so I just want to be fair to everybody to acknowledge that that's what's happening. And so eventually people begin to say, well, we don't want to loan money to the United States anymore, and we don't want to sell our products to them for a lower price. And so they begin to raise the price, and now we begin to have supply shortages. Most of the media has blamed it on the cocoa, but and that certainly is partially true, but the supply shortages were coming long before the cocoa, and those supply shortages have not fixed themselves now that the cocoa is long gone. In fact, if anything, many of the supply shortages have gotten worse, or the prices have just gotten so high that it's killed off demand. So it affects the rest of the world, this problem of money printing and of having a debt-based fiat monetary system, in the sense that it's unfair for them to be paid by it in those products. And that's why a lot of countries have looked at either using their own currency to purchase those products, or using digital assets like Bitcoin, or even using gold and silver, actual precious metals, in order to purchase or collateralize the items that they are purchasing. So how does it affect us? Well, it is worse for the rest of the world, and that's why inflation is worse in many places in the world than in the United States. But it's still bad for us as well, because there's only a pot of so many goods and services, and printing money doesn't increase that pot of goods and services. And then if you print money and do helicopter money, that's where you send checks in the mail, or if you pay people to stay home, or if you pay people to not work, then that's just more money. That's actually less goods and services, more money, meaning that all that extra money has less and less buying power or value. So I know that was a lot of economic theory and just a lot of cerebral talking there, but hopefully that explained kind of how we got to this situation, why it is not being solved, why the problem happened in 07, 08, now it's happening again, and why we keep having to borrow more and more money to service the larger and larger debt. So let's talk about now the solution, because I think, even if you didn't completely follow all of that, we'd get the general idea that the problem is debt, the problem is spending more than we make, the problem is trying to perpetuate that system by cheating people, either depositors in banks who trusted the bank with their money and then the bank spent it frivolously, or the federal government doing that on a larger scale. We know that the problem is that our monetary system is debt-based rather than based on something tangible, something solid like land, precious metals, digital asset that can't just be, there's lots of phony digital assets that are not proof of work, that don't require power and a network of servers and miners to power the network and to process transactions. So those are all, you can have scams in decentralized finance just as well as you can in centralized finance. So it's not that, DeFi is this answer to everything, but there are quality digital assets that can't be printed, that are not debt-based, that you can't cheat the system, you can't skirt the system. And so that's what we're talking to. When I refer to that, I'm talking to those rather than the meme coins or whatever other digital assets that people want to pump that don't have real utility and can't be considered money because they don't have portability, transferability, and all the things that are required to be a monetary definition. So what does the Bible say? Well, I actually wrote out a great sheet. I do this sometimes when I come up against verses where I'm going through a bunch of them, but I want to remember them. I don't want to just proof text to make a point, or just kind of go through them and just be like, okay, yeah, that's nice. And I found that old-fashioned in typing, you could type them in too, but sometimes just writing them down is just a great way to commit those things to your heart. It's a great way too to get the details, because sometimes we think we know what a verse is saying, but then we don't, because we get confused, we mess it up. and then we come with the wrong outcome, the wrong conclusion, which is not helpful at all. So I wrote these down word for word. They're all in different translations. Some of it's Holman Christian, some of it's NIV. I think most of them are NIV. I think one of these might be ESV. So not a particular translation, but here's some great verses, I think, to help us understand how we can begin to respond. Because truly, I believe the author of trade, the author of money, the author of the ability for us to work and provide for our families and be a light in a dark world, has the solution, has the answer for a problem in our lives, in the life of our government, in the life of our monetary system. 1 Corinthians 4:2, now it is required that those who have been given a trust prove faithful, which is really at the heart of the definition of stewardship. When someone entrusts something to us, when we earn something, when we have something that we hold in our hands of value, or that is under our legal name or social security number of value, we become stewards of that. And we could argue, I probably, if you're not a believer, you wouldn't agree that belongs to God, that you probably believe that it belongs to you. And I would understand that. I believe that everything I have belongs to the Lord, and that if I have it in my possession, it's because He has given me stewardship over that thing. And that is a responsibility, a trust. And that God is, in fact, trusting me to take that asset and, we might say, keep it safe. That might be, and I hear this falsely preached, or not at our church, but in places, or stated by even financial advisors. But the truth is, the parable of the talents, which I talk about all the time, we're not going to talk about it today, tells us that we're not just to keep our assets safe, but we're actually to bring a return on that investment. Burying it in the ground and keeping it safe is actually considered a wicked act. So it's that's hard for a lot of believers, I think, a lot of Christians, to understand what our responsibility is as a steward. And this is really why we're taking the opportunity today to get down and dirty and into the mud and into the grime of this topic, even though it's controversial, even though it's hard, even though it can really fly in your face. If you are big into centralized finance, it can really be a hard truth to embrace and to be challenged with, because the consequences are enormous for how we live our lives. All right, next verse, 1 Peter 4:10. Each of you should use whatever gift you have received to serve others as faithful stewards. 1 Timothy 5:8. Anyone who does not provide for your relatives, and especially their own husband, has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. Oh, stab me in the heart. That is a tough challenge right there. Romans 13:8. Do not owe anything to anyone except to love one another, for the one who loves another has fulfilled the law, which gets into, speaks to the debt-based system. And we could get in the weeds and debate, is going into debt really a sin, or is it okay to have a little debt, or is it okay to have debt that's investment debt but not personal debt? And we can get really in the weeds, and that is a very important conversation to have, but that's not the conversation that we're having today, because we don't quite have the time. But it does speak to and help us understand that debt is undesirable, and certainly, most assuredly, in terms of the effectiveness of our conversation today, a debt-based monetary system is certainly unbiblical. And does that mean then, the logical conclusion, if a Christian were to participate in it, they would be participating in that sin? I think that's a question you'll have to answer, especially after today, after being confronted with some cold, hard truths, or maybe some warm, generous truths. I don't know. Cold, hard sounds kind of intense, but that's kind of how I roll. I do have a little bit of intensity in my personality, although I like to be peaceful and laid back. That's not necessarily how I always roll. That's one reason I moved out here, to slow it down and calm it down just a little bit. So I think that's a question you'll have to explore and answer that we're probably not going to explore that. But what I would say is that the Bible teaches we are to be in the world, but not of the world. And so perhaps our participation in this monetary system does need to begin to end, and that we need to transition ourselves. And I know many believers, I know many of you who are watching right now, you own silver, you own gold, you own land, you own Bitcoin, you own tangible assets that have hard utility, hard use cases that are transferable, portable, have value. So I know that to some extent I'm speaking to the choir, but I know that for many, this banking crisis is really the first time, or maybe the 07-08 banking crisis was the first time that you were ever really challenged with the idea that your participation in the system could be, I'm not saying that it is, but could be really what is causing you harm in your finances. That credit card debt that comes as a result of that, that malinvestment that comes as a result of that, gambling, speculative, unreasonably non-risk balanced speculative investing has gotten you into a place of trouble. And that because of that, you're not able to provide for your family the way that you could, or you're not prepared to start a family, which is where some of you fall. You know, you're in those young years, those college years or high school years, early adult years, and that's the time for you to be forming your strategy and walking with the Lord and understanding His calling on your life, and beginning to create that snowball of investment that will help you provide for your family down the road. And many of you are, and I understand because I didn't always make the best financial decisions as a teenager or as a young man, but you know, you're buying caffeine drinks or coffees or whatever it is, you know, and instead you could be, you know, investing and bringing a return on those funds, and just drink some ice water. All right, which I am a hypocrite because I need to drink less pop and more ice water, or tea, or, you know, a better choice. So full disclosure, I'm a hypocrite on that one. But if I could have back all of the money that I spent on soft drinks in the last 45 years, well, I could do a lot with that. So, all right. So what is the solution then? What is the solution? Well, let's begin by just acknowledging, and not trying to be like that 30-second media soundbite, like, oh, let's just do these two things that this political party is suggesting, and poof, it'll all be solved. Or let's just throw as much money at it as we can and borrow as much money as we can, and poof, it'll all be solved. I think the first step is to acknowledge that we have created a situation, just like we create in our own personal lives with sin, that does not have a simple answer, that you can't just wave a magic wand and make all the consequences go away and make everything, you know, whole again. That there is going to be a time where we have to reap what we sow. We have sown a debt catastrophe, and we must reap a debt catastrophe. Now, eggs going from, you know, $1.50 a dozen to $7 a dozen certainly is the beginning of that, but that's not, unfortunately, where it's going to end. That the system will have to be replaced or repaired. Now let's look at both of those options and kind of apply our biblical learning. And maybe this is the first time you've heard these verses today. Maybe you have had those memorized since you were in Awana or Bible school, or, you know, you study the Word regularly and you understand those principles and you're ready to apply them. I think really we have to understand two things. Is one, what would those that are the policymakers, decision makers, have to do in order to solve the monetary system? But then also, if they don't, okay, which right now there is no evidence that they are taking responsibility for the situation and fixing it. It appears with the bailouts, and I'm saying this because of all the bailouts, we're just kicking the can down the road, which is what we seem to do. Then the consequences of that will continue to plague us. And so that puts us, the individual, the family, in the American family in a place where they have to decide if it's time for them to opt out of the system. Now, prior to 2012, that was very difficult to do because really the only place you could go was silver and gold. Of course, real estate, but real estate isn't portable, so it doesn't fit a definition of money because money has to be portable. And if you want to buy and sell land, you've got to pay a commission. It takes a number of days to close, and you have to transfer large sums of money, which takes a long time in centralized finance. With digital assets, if I wanted to give you Bitcoin, I could do that in about 10 seconds. But if I want to send you money from my bank, they don't have it, so now they've got to go through this 5 to 7 business day process to go find my money and so that I can get it back and give it to you. So that made it more difficult. Now with the birth of proof of work and digital assets, now that situation has changed. And of course, this has compounded the problem for central banking. And this is why it is very fascinating that while the stock market has moved down, and values and shares of banks have moved down, and while there's just general bond chaos and difficulties in central financing, Bitcoin has gone from $20,000 to $28,000 in just a matter of days. Now, why is that? Well, I think that asset is proving that it is the flight to safety that has been a theory to this point. All right. So if you've been a little bit fearful of being in digital assets, I would say you are a wise person, because any new, untested, untried outside of real battle is not necessarily reliable. And I would say digital assets still have not fully proven themselves. I think it really will take several hundred years for them to really prove themselves. But this certainly goes a long way for us to understand, okay, so an asset that has real tangible value, that has utility, that cannot be created out of thin air, that has a limited supply, that asset has true value, and it is going to rise in comparison to the dollar. Because really those assets, one Bitcoin still equals 1 Bitcoin, 1 ounce of silver still equals 1 ounce of silver. All this changes, the dollar has declined. And so what we can take away from that is that there is other options. Now, this is not financial advice, and this isn't a talk on, what you should do, what money moves you should make. It's just a talk to understand that why the system is collapsing, why this problem with the banks has just had a Band-Aid put over it, but it is in no way solved. And now the Fed, who of course is meeting today, is going to have to make a very difficult decision on interest rates. If they raise interest rates, they will crush more banks. No question about it. The banks that are barely hanging on by a thread will get crushed because the value of the bonds that they're holding will get further crushed. They will have less liquidity, more people will withdraw deposits, and the runs will continue, and the government will have to bail out more and more and more and more banks until the government just can't bail them out. There's not enough money in the whole world to bail out all the banks, unfortunately. So we can only print it out of thin air, or we can let them fail. And both of those have severe consequences. And so, and as a side, let's just stop for a moment. We're kind of in the thick of this pretty intense conversation. It's just a great lesson. That's what I do when there's failure, when there's trouble, when I've messed up, and I suffer the consequences of my actions. One thing that's changed for me from the day I turned about 35 years old until now is that I try to not waste the pain, to not waste the failure, to look at it and say, okay, this was a terrible idea. What led me to that decision? What does the Bible say about it? How can I walk a new path, which I would define as repentance? How can I go in a different direction, a new path, to demonstrate that I am now standing on biblical principles rather than my own thoughts, or what probably most of us do is we just go along with worldly wisdom, right? Just worldly wisdom. That's what I'm going to do. It's what everybody else is doing, so I'm just going to do the same thing, which really is foolishness. So let's go back now, just as we've identified that, let's go back now to our conversation. So systematically, that debt-based monetary system will have to be replaced. To repair it, the only true option is that the dollar will have to regain a backing of some type, because the faith and credit of the United States is in question. And because of that, and that's reasonable, because the government has not been able to make good on its monetary stability. So the dollar, in other words, the dollar has lost too much value. So we have, in essence, stolen from our citizens, or, that's probably hard. Let's be generous. We have placed a hidden tax on our citizens, and we have placed an even larger hidden tax on everyone else in the world who's not a citizen of the United States. And so because of that, we will need to now restore that. And how do you restore that? If you tell a lie, or if you do something incredible, then what do? Well, you begin to have accountability with those that you've wronged. That is the correct thing to do. And you take that accountability and you demonstrate through repeated acts of integrity that you are not just sorry for what you did, but repentant for what you did, and you restore that credibility. And so we will need to take an asset like silver or gold or Bitcoin, or maybe there's something else even better that I don't know of, and tie that to the dollar, give it tie it to something tangible, do away with this whole fiat borrowing, deficit spending chaos that we have gotten ourselves in, and repair that system moving forward. If we're not able to do that, if we are not able to repair, which, you're probably thinking, well, which is better? Which is better? I don't know which is better. Repairing probably is harder. Repairing is definitely more fair. It would be a more fair way of moving forward to repair rather than to replace. Because once you replace it, everyone who's holding that asset will be the winners, the beneficiaries. Everyone who's holding dollars or dollar-based instruments will be the losers. Now, you might say, well, that's fair because they chose to participate in a worldly fiat system, and they are suffering the consequences of that. I would say you're not wrong, but that's harsh. That's harsh. And I would like to think that grace could be extended, because we all have sinned. We all have made mistakes. We all have been poor stewards. And once we recognize what good stewardship is, and we began to recognize that what we have belongs to the Lord, not to us, and that we have a responsibility to be wise with it and not foolish, and to live on a budget, spend wisely, to avoid debt to the best of our ability, and to bring a return with our investments. Once we recognize that, and really even the other simple things as faithful as just giving our tithe and supporting the work of the gospel message, and all the aspects of stewardship. I'm kind of getting too much off track, but really want to affirm and reinforce those tenets as much as I can. But once we recognize good stewardship, we want to have grace shown to us, so that we don't, so that we can turn in a new direction and move in a new direction, and not be punished for, every bad decision that we've made, and that perhaps, even though that is what we deserve, but perhaps to have some mercy shown. And so I would say mercifully, it would be better to try to repair the system and to try to, help create awareness. I mean, that's a part of what I feel like my ministry is to create awareness for what it looks like to live a godly life, and to kind of pull yourself out of the world and the worldly way of seeing things and doing things, and to begin to think as much in a godly perspective as is possible. I'm certainly not fully there. I'm running the race. I'm walking the path just like you, and I'm just reaching a hand out and inviting you to join me as I take that walk. So in no way am I, trying to get on my high horse and act like I know everything. But we have to find a way to either be a part of that solution, and if we're not in a position, which many of us are not then we need to look in other ways to what I call opt out of the system, and to begin to place our, as we trade our time for a monetary trade, we make a monetary trade, and we begin to store that time long term, then it needs to not be in debt and in a debt-based system, but it needs to be in tangible assets. I mean, something as simple as a can of tomato soup, something as tangible as a bag of rice, or some gold coins, some silver coins, some bitcoins, some maybe buying a small piece of land, or running a farm, or buying a business. And maybe it could be something big. If you have a lot, if a lot has been entrusted to you and you have a lot of assets, then perhaps you have a way to do something even more significant, or a combination of all of those things. And I am a believer, even though it's not directly from the Bible, but you should not put all your eggs in one basket. That is often a recipe for disaster, that we do need to be diversified and reduce our risk to the best that we can. I mean, you can never reduce all your risk. You can live the safest life possible, and some frozen waste from an airplane comes flying out of the sky and crashes through your roof and hits you on the head and kills you. You just can't avoid, not to create a new phobia or fear out there, but you just can't avoid every little thing in life. That life is full of risks, and so it's not about living risk-free. In fact, I'd almost argue that is unbiblical. But we are to be good stewards of ourselves and what has been placed in our care, what has been entrusted to us, and make wise and shrewd decisions with it. So, the banking crisis is a significant problem. It is one that is solvable, but right now I'm not hearing from the leaders on the federal level the correct solutions in order to solve those problems. And so that has placed me in a position of stewardship, that I must now take responsibility for what the Lord has entrusted to me and begin to opt out of the system. And so that is kind of the challenge today, to begin to look at this, to consider the scriptures that we discussed, to consider what is right and what is wrong, what is moral and what is immoral, what is ethical or unethical. And I am nobody's Holy Spirit, and I'm not telling you what to do, but I am just the messenger, pointing out some things, and I hope that it has maybe caused you to think about the situation more. If you are already on this path of stewardship, that perhaps it will encourage you to go to the next step, to go the next stretch of the race down the road, and to make some of those hard decisions. And I understand those decisions are hard. They're not simple. There's not you can't wave a magic wand. You do have to. There is a lot to learn about investing, and about being a wise steward and a faithful steward. And there is self-restraint. That's probably, for those that are beginning this journey, that's the hardest part, is restraining yourselves from buying things that you don't have money to pay for, to restrain yourself from eating more food or more expensive food than what is in your budget. While you're over here and you're spending $100 a month on coffee, but over here you don't even have enough money to buy your car with cash, or a monetary commodity, because right now is probably the wrong time to start talking about cash, but or whatever it is. I'm using generalizations, which always miss lots of people, but I think you know what I'm saying is deferring gratification, delaying gratification, so that someday, whenever if that's your thing, having an expensive coffee every day, having a really nice car, or owning a certain business, or even luxury things that don't necessarily have value. I truly believe that there is a reward to good stewardship. And after decades of, or years of being faithful and denying self and storing up provisions that you should, I have no I have no problem looking at a retiree who's worked their whole life. They have invested wisely and they have money to spend to go to the lake, to take a nice vacation, to, whatever thing that might appear to me to be extravagant. I'm celebrating with them. And in fact, I'm saying, I hope that I have the wisdom and the self-restraint to deny those pleasures at this time in my life. And not all pleasures. I'm not saying, you never do anything fun, never spend any money, eat beans and rice for every meal. I'm not saying that. But, we all tend to have these things that we like to blow money on that don't bring a good return. And so when I see somebody who's enjoying the fruit of their labor, I don't get mad or jealous. I say, good for you. Well done, good and faithful servant, good and faithful steward. And in fact, the Bible said to the steward who invested wisely, come and enjoy, come and see, come and participate in what your master has provided. So I would say good for you. And if you are, watching this video from your yacht, then, invite me to come aboard next time and we'll do Porch Shot from the yacht. No, I would say, good for you that you had that opportunity. Now, I know not everyone gains their wealth fairly or honestly, and so that's not what I'm talking about. I'm just talking about those who have run the race, they've worked faithfully, and they are continuing in the ministry that God's called them, but they are also retiring in a sense, or taking some time off, taking some rest time to enjoy what they have, the provisions that they have stored up, or that perhaps their other wise family members have stored up for them. I mean, I hope it's not a guarantee by any means, especially if inflation continues like it is now and the economy continues like it is now. But I hope that I will be able to leave a financial legacy to my children that will help them, and it will be a testimony of what can happen, what is possible if we are good stewards of the money that God has entrusted to us. So I hope that this has been helpful. I hope that it has shed light and truth on the situation. I'd love to hear from you, to hear what your comments are, what your perceptions are and how you see this situation. If you are interested or apathetic or somewhere in between about it. I think to some extent we're all a little apathetic. We all have PTSD towards news stuff, and that a lot of times we don't want to deal with the shock of it, so we just don't participate, which is not necessarily a bad idea, I might add. But I do think we need to be aware of facts, and that those often do not come from the news. Sometimes they do. I'm kind of hard on news, so I apologize. If you are an honest, good, balanced reporter out there, good for you. Keep up the good work. I don't necessarily know many of them, and maybe that's just the problem that I have, but there are ways to find out the truth. Thanks to the information age and the internet, we have opportunities to get alternate perspectives and to weigh all of the testimonies and to weigh the evidence and to make a rational decision based on the evidence and not just how we feel or what is easy or convenient for us. So I hope this has been helpful. I hope that it has maybe started you on a journey to explore what stewardship looks like in your life. I would be happy to help you in any way that I can to talk more about this. And maybe you see it differently, and maybe you're deep in centralized finance and you see a path and a way to solve it and to bring back honesty, integrity to the system. And I would love to hear about that. I would love to have conversation about it, or to send some messages back and forth. So please feel free to reach out. Hope this has been a blessing and an encouragement to you. As we close today, I want to mention a woman. Her name is Rietta Wiles. She passed away peacefully last night and went home to be with the Lord, a faithful matriarch and a faithful part of our church family that has served many, many years. And so her loss is felt throughout our church, or throughout our community, throughout her family most assuredly. And I would just like to say what an honor and a blessing it has been to be a part of her world and a part of her life. I've learned so much from her, and most importantly from the example that she lived out in her life, being on the mission field, serving faithfully in the church, always being a humble woman and encourager, and such. And so I'm thankful for her, and my prayers go to her husband Mike and their family, and love you guys, and want to celebrate the life that she lived and mourn the loss of a great lady. So we'll leave you with that. We will see you next Thursday at 4 o'clock for episode 7. Have a great week. We'll see you soon.